Some months, opportunities flood in, but other months, it's quiet. Scaling amplifies what's broken. This is not content, this is positioning. Diagnosis precedes deployment. Every business operates in a system. The system is comprised of four structural domains. Demand is where visibility converts into demand. Conversion is where the interest created by the demand converts to clients. Capacity is where we deliver on the promise. And cash is where the value transforms into stability for the business. Every business operates within this flow. Revenue flow alone, however, is not enough. Revenue flow explains how the business grows. Constraints explain why growth breaks. And until constraint is understood and located, every decision is a guess. This is the streamline and scale framework. The operating grid. This is the actual operating grid. And this is where the work of revenue in the system actually happens. So within this grid, this is not about seeing movement. This is where we discover truth. So a founder, let me go back and just go through quickly. So in the spotlight quadrant, there are four quadrants. The spotlight quadrant is where visibility creates demand. This mirrors the four structural domains because this is the revenue flow. And conversion is where that interest converts into commitment. Activate is where delivery fulfills the promise, and cash is where the value is transformed for the business. Okay. So the founder, these are the things that the founder can see. Where revenue flows, where constraints exist, and most importantly, where scale becomes dangerous. Now, there are four primary structural domains. As we mentioned earlier, demand correlates with spotlight. Conversion domain correlates with the activity in the offer quadrant. The capacity domain correlates with the activity in the system where we deliver in the activate quadrant. And retain is where the cash domain exists. So constraints exist only in one quadrant at a time. And that quadrant is referred to as the primary domain. As you'll learn later, there is a ripple effect that occurs, but the actual origin of the constraint is always one domain at a time. So before we go into the deep dive on signal volatility, I thought it would be useful to share how we diagnose a constraint. So we start with the pattern. And patterns are important because unlike a manufacturing line where you can see things move through the system, for a service-based business, you don't have visibility. And so the patterns allow you to receive the signal that indicates something is off. We take that pattern and then we can, depending on what that pattern is, we can identify which of the four domains is the location for that, which of the four domains are primary for that particular pattern. Once we identify the constraint domain, we can locate that constraint within the revenue system. Once we identify the constraint within the revenue system, the next thing we want to do is look at the signal and the metrics to confirm that that is in fact the primary domain. And then once that's done, we confirm it, quantify it, and then we can, once the diagnosis is complete, we can make a determination on the appropriate deployment that matches and will, most importantly, move revenue forward and release the constraints before we scale. And that is how this, again, is the revenue system, and it shows with the overlay of the four primary domains how they correlate together. Now, today, the archetype of scale that we are looking at is signal volatility. This is the primary domain is spotlight, or the primary domain is demand, which the activity for demand is located within the spotlight quadrant. Okay, it's spotlight location. The founder symptom, or what you may find yourself thinking, or you may have heard someone else thinking, is, man, some months the leads are just flooding in, and other months, crickets, or it's quiet. Maybe not crickets, but quiet. So, okay, there are some symptoms that you can see of this pattern. So we look at the symptoms, and if you see the symptoms, you can have an awareness to go, what domain does this lie in? But here are, for this particular pattern, lead flow arrives in bursts, feast or famine. The pipeline fills rapidly and then drains. Sales conversions cluster into short windows. There are quiet stretches in between deals. Revenue clusters into specific months. So the pipeline feels alive one week, and then it's silent the next. No consistency. So we can't plan like that. The signal breakdown looks like operational signals, such as we burst the marketing campaigns. We have more campaigns. Founder visibility spikes. There's irregular referral inflow. The audience reach decay between activities. So we're up and we're down. We're up and we're down. The result is the demand appears intermittent instead of consistent and compounding, which is what we want. The conceptual mechanism. So in the lab, when we're looking at these, we're really investigating these patterns. And so we're wrapping up we're wrapping up the signal volatility arc. And so we look at the mechanism here in the deep dive. And so the variables that should be stable are qualified lead flow. The founder should experience lead flow that arrives in bursts. Instead of steady signal and steady pipeline, you're experiencing burst signal and burst pipeline, which of course, again, is not stable, which is what we want, right? We are using a sample scenario to go through and actually visualize this pattern of signal volatility with numbers to see what the actual impact is of two scenarios: scaling without making any adjustment for the misdiagnosis and fixing the constraint. So for this scenario, we have a model agency, a model company that is an agency, not a model agency. Target monthly revenue, 150,000. Average deal size, 30,000. Close rate is 30%, and the sales cycle is 45 days. So for this, let's see, let me just think for a minute. I want to make sure I'm going through this. So to reach 150,000 in revenue with a $30,000 deal size and a 30% close rate, the deals required is 5 deals per month with approximately 17 qualified opportunities per month. So pipeline stability requires consistent opportunity flow, right? Here is the pattern that we're looking at in the metrics. Month 1, 28 opportunities. We're booming. 8.4 deals, 252,000. Month 2, though, 8 opportunities. 30% close rate, 2.4 deals, 72,000. Month 3, 22 opportunities, 30% close rate, 6.6 deals, 198K. Month 4, 10 opportunities, 30% close rate, 3 deals, 90,000 in revenue. So the pipeline is unstable. The revenue is clustering, but it's not compounding evenly, okay? Now, the misdiagnosis pathway. The founder, on the left-hand side, we look at what the founder sees and what the founder concludes. And on the right side of this slide, we're looking at what the typical response would be based on the misdiagnosis. So the founder sees the revenue swings and the pipeline droughts and concludes that sales team is inconsistent, the offer's weak, the follow-up is not good, there's some issue with the price. And so in the deployment or the action taken based on what the founder sees and their assessment of what they concluded, their diagnosis, or in this case, misdiagnosis, is more sales scripts. It's sales' fault. And we need more closers. We need more discounts. And ultimately, within the business, we have more pressure. But the constraint is not in sales. Let's look at response versus origin. On the left-hand side, we have the response. This is where you're deploying. On the right-hand side, we have the origin. So the response to this is more outreach, more sales hires, more closing pressure. The origin, however, is unstable demand signal, campaign bursts, founder visibility spikes, and irregular referral inflow. The constraint lives in the origin, not in where we deploy the response. Sales activity is responding to a signal problem. So let's talk about the consequences. We're expecting monthly revenue of 150K. But when we look at the actual revenue pattern, it's fluctuating wildly. Sometimes it's, much higher. Sometimes it's much lower, less than half. Less than half. Revenue volatility emerges from signal volatility. All right, so we don't have the signal and we don't have the revenue to match. The system baseline. Healthy signal system produces consistent opportunity flow. For example, 17 opportunities, 5 closes, 150K in revenue. The pipeline behaves predictably. Predictability allows us to plan. So we're going to look at two paths, and I'm going to show you the path and then what the result looks like in actual numbers. Okay. So path A, let me just make sure I'm going through this appropriately. Give me just a moment to make sure that I'm getting these right. Okay. So in path A, we're just going to scale the distortion. We're not going to make any changes. We're going to take those actions. We're going to deploy what the founder has identified, mostly sales fixes, right? So the founder in path A, the founder responds by increasing sales activity, hiring, scripts, discounting, more pressure. The result of that, however, is the opportunity spike gets bigger, the coverage gaps get worse, the revenue stays static, and forecasting stays weak. So in reality, the demand signal stays unstable. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't want to find out it's unstable after investing in the deployment activities, right? Which is what happened here. So let's look at the other alternative, path B. In path B, we slow down. We don't scale right away in activity, but we fix the true constraint. And that is the constraint where, that is the area where the constraint originates. So in this case, the demand signal is the culprit. And so the founder stabilizes the demand signal. How does he or she do that? Consistent visibility channel, structured referral engine, a regular audience reach, consistent, and more even opportunity creation. So we put more signal out there. Then opportunities arrive more steadily. The pipeline fills gradually. Revenue becomes predictable, and sales execution becomes calmer. Okay. Now, let's look at the outcome. Two paths. Path A, scale the unstable signal. Path B, delay the scale, fix the signal instability. And what is the outcome from that? We can look at months 1 through 4, and in comparison, you can see that path A we've talked about. It's all over the place. Path B is fairly consistent. 17, 18, 16, 17, you can work with that, right? The revenue stays near target. The cash timing becomes more predictable, and planning becomes possible. The math did not change. The signal did. I'll give you a moment to look at that. So now, even though every constraint exists in only one primary domain, there is pretty much always a downstream impact. It propagates to other areas, other domains. In this case, it propagates to conversion, to capacity, and to cash. But the constraint still originates in demand. Fix the constraint within demand, fix the demand signal, then it flows through every other quadrant. It's fixed in every other quadrant, okay? What is the resolution path? First, pause the reactive deployment. Second, audit the demand signal sources. Where are we experiencing inconsistent demand. Third, stabilize the visibility channel. What do we need to be doing different? Are we on the right channels? Make that assessment. Confirm the demand domain. Look at those signals and look at the metrics that are associated with them, and then make the correction and redeploy the growth. Now, at this point, you have been exposed to the pattern. You can see the constraint domains and the quadrants within the revenue system. You understand that the revenue system is a system that every business operates in. What you may not be comfortable with, or what you may not fully grasp, is how to identify where the constraint lives. So founders face a choice. You can guess the constraint or you can confirm the constraint. The Crystallized Reality Map identifies the true structural origin of the constraint within a business and that origin of revenue instability. Now, we are talking about the demand domain today. Demand is not traffic. Demand is signal clarity. Signal precedes scale. Diagnose before you deploy.